Auburn had a rough weekend in the NFL draft. And you can blame Bryan Harsin, but not for the reason people are talking about.
Well, Zach, I actually just finished crushing some chicken farm, and I am freaking ready to rock and roll.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tiger, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Roger McCreary was Auburn's lone draft pick this past weekend. Whose fault was that? We'll touch on that, as well as what his impact on the Tennessee Titans may be, as we'll be joined by Tyler Rowland, host of Locked On Titans. And Auburn, unforced error happened. We'll touch on that as well, kind of getting in their own way. But first things first, look, when something bad happens or when something doesn't quite go the way you want it to, everybody wants to blame somebody. We all want to point out, whose fault is this? Who can we blame for this specific thing? And I think that happened over the course of the weekend. And most of the time, there is someone to blame, but not always. Sometimes it's just a bunch of different circumstances, and they all line up together, and you get an outcome that you don't want. Auburn had just one player drafted in the NFL draft this weekend. And it was a man that I love, Roger McCreary, Auburn cornerback, now Tennessee Titan cornerback. But there's been some drama, shocker, some drama among the Auburn football fan base about, is this Bryan Harsin's fault or not? And I think you can blame Bryan Harsin, but I don't think you can blame him for, the development of Smoke Monday and Zakoby McClain. I don't think that makes sense. He inherited them both late into their careers at Auburn. Smoke Monday, it's not Bryan Harsin's fault that Smoke Monday did not ever look comfortable in pass coverage in 2021. That's not Bryan Harsin's fault. It's not Bryan Harsin's fault that Zakoby McClain didn't grow 2 inches since he became Auburn's head coach. But here's why you can blame Bryan Harsin for only one Auburn Tiger being drafted. Several players believe in what he's building and what he's doing at Auburn. There are several Auburn Tigers that would have been drafted this past weekend if they chose to enter the NFL draft. Colby Wooden would have been a draft pick this weekend. Derek Hall would have been a draft pick this weekend. With the importance that the NFL puts on pass rush, Colby Wooden can do it from inside the tackles. Derek Hall led Auburn in sacks. Anytime a team, somebody leads an SEC team in sacks, they're going to get drafted. Several Auburn fans are like, what about Jeff Holland? There were other things at play there. Maybe Eku Leota, probably more so next year than this year. Jalen Simpson's going to be a guy that the athletic matrix and analytics really, really like because he's so, he's versatile and can move really well. Owen Papo would have been drafted. I know some teams would have taken him off their draft board because of his injury, but other teams would have checked him and made sure that he was good. And if team doctors gave him the thumbs up, they would have been interested in Owen Papo late. Maybe some of the offensive linemen, maybe Nick Brahms, Keandre Jones, Brandon Council, possibly just because of their experience. I think there's value in the SEC in that. But no, they chose to come back and be a part of what Bryan Harsin is building at Auburn. And we've talked to dudes on this team that chose to come back. John Samuel Shanker is another one, where they come on this show and unprompted, they talk about how close this team is and how all of the crap that happened early in the offseason with Bryan Harsin potentially losing his job, it brought everybody closer. And they could have left, but they didn't because they believe in what their head coach is doing. And man, I think that is extremely, extremely important. And I think any Auburn fan would have taken the return of a John Samuel Shanker or a Colby Wooden or a Derek Hall or an Owen Papo. They would have taken another year of all of those guys at Auburn versus just seeing their name pop up at the bottom of their screen on Saturday as a day 3 pick. Right? If I'm off on this, please let me know. But I think any of you would prefer to watch them in 2022 opposed to seeing them as a potential backup player in the league. And I just think it's very important here that we talk about not moving the goalposts. A year ago, we all agreed that what Bryan Harsin inherited was a bad roster at certain spots. Now, they were very strong at defensive back and at linebacker and defensive line and running back, but those are positions that Gus Malzahn consistently was able to bring in. But we were all kind of hoping, okay, can Bryan Harsin develop a quarterback? Can Bryan Harsin develop offensive linemen? Can they use talented wide receivers and scheme those guys open? That's what we were all holding on to. And for folks to be frustrated that Auburn only had one guy drafted, look, don't get me wrong, it stinks. It totally stinks. I love the NFL draft, and I want Auburn to be as much of a part of it as they possibly can. But it didn't happen. It's not because Bryan Harsin's bad at building this program. In fact, I would say it's the opposite, that he's got these fringe guys choosing to return and be really good college football players and improve their stock because they trust Bryan Harsin. And with the world of the transfer portal, all of those names that I mentioned, literally all of them, except for, I believe, Brandon Council, they could have transferred and played anywhere else. Actually, I think Brandon Council could have because his was a grad transfer. So all of them could have transferred and played somewhere else without losing a year of eligibility. But they chose to come back and play for Bryan Harsin. And they chose to come back and not enter the NFL draft. So we all know this was a build a year ago, and I think that's important. Don't move the goalposts. Now, Auburn did mess some things up over this weekend. And let's be clear, the messaging was bad. That's coming up. And then we will hear from Tyler Rowland, host of Locked On Titans, about Roger McCreary. But first, I want to tell you guys about Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that looks and tastes like a candy bar. Built Bars are delicious. They are all covered 100% in chocolate, and they have a flavor for everyone. They've got new ones. Let's see. Where is it? Banana cream pie, raspberry double chocolate, and of course, so many more. And they're constantly adding new flavors every single day. Every Built Bar has around 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off. That is at Built.com. All right. Auburn messed some things up this weekend. Let's just be very, very clear on this. So if you're watching on YouTube, I am putting up a graphic. If you're listening on audio, the graphic that Auburn Athletics put out was the path to the draft. I'll start that over because I just tripped over myself. The path to the draft begins on the plains. Not a good look. Not a good look. And as you can guess, with the reputation and just the internet itself, this has already been memed. But the path to the draft begins on the plains. And of course, it's got the Auburn logo at the bottom right. It's got the NFL draft logo in the middle. And it's got Auburn's font and their branding. The graphic aesthetically looks good. But what it's telling folks, I think, is a little tone deaf, if I'm being honest with you. Auburn had one dude drafted in the draft. The first time this has happened since 2013. It's not great. Not a great look. Corey Lemonier was the lone draft pick in that draft. And so moving forward, it's like, okay, Bryan Harsin's messaging, I'm big on messaging. If you've listened to this show for any amount of time, you know this. Bryan Harsin's messaging has been consistent. He wants people to come to Auburn and then go to the NFL, which of course every coach wants, but Bryan Harsin, I think, has been more clear in sending that message out there. And that never was clearer than with National Signing Day, when these kids would sign their national letters of intent, their NLI, and Auburn would get word, and then he would get a card and he would walk up to a podium. The draft music would be playing. The pick was in, and he'd read their name. And it'd be like they were drafting them to play for the Auburn Tigers. And the social media team on that was perfect. It was the coolest thing. As somebody who loves the draft, it's awesome. And also as a coaching staff that is promising development and upside and the belief in something past college as far as playing into the NFL, I don't know how else you kind of articulate and show them what you're doing. And you saw recruits that were signing, quote tweeting and saying like, man, this is awesome. Oh, this is cool. Hey, come to Auburn. And so all of that messaging is fantastic. And I think with all these promises that Bryan Harsin's making these kids of saying, hey, come to Auburn, I'm going to work with you and develop you and make you an NFL draft pick, I believe him in most cases. In most cases, there's obviously some natural limitations and only so much he can control. But I think with a lot of these talented dudes that he's going to get on this team, I do think he will develop them. So why did they need to do that this year? I'm putting it up again. The path to the draft begins on the plains. And so in a year where you knew at max you were going to have 3, when Georgia had a historic year and had 15 guys drafted, LSU in a down year had 10, and Bama had 7. And it's just the path to the draft begins on the plains. It's like, what? Why are you leaning into that? Support Roger. Maybe put messaging out that he was a 3-star from Mobile. If you want to attract the Mobile kids, I think that's something that you do. But this to me just seemed off. It just seemed off to me. And I think it was an unforced error. I really, really do. If you're watching on YouTube, please comment down below. I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this. Reach out on Twitter and the Discord. But the path to the draft begins on the plains. That's not true right now. I'm not saying it won't be, but that's just not true right now. Now, if you would have thought that Colby Wooden would go and Derek Hall would go and you just had more draftable names in there, I think that'd be something different. But I just think big picture, the lack of awareness of what you're putting out there was bad. I would have loved to have been in the room when this was decided, because I know everything over there has to go through a million different people. And it's just like, everybody signed off on that. I'm just like, what are you doing? What is going on? Did nobody look at a mock draft or like big boards? It's just crazy. I thought it was crazy to me. All right. So before I jump into the conversation with Tyler Rowland, obviously some big news, some big news on the Auburn basketball front. Bruce Pearl found a way to replace Walker Kessler. Janai Broome, one of the bigger transfer targets in the portal. He committed to Auburn during the draft. And of course, Auburn fans were excited about that because that was a win. I don't know if there was much winning for Auburn happening in the draft this weekend, so they latched onto the winning, and there's nothing wrong with that, despite what people may say. And so Janai Broome, a 6'10" presence. I think he can do a lot of what Walker Kessler does. I think he can impact boards with his size and his aggression. I think his shot blocking ability is there. He had a game last year where he blocked 12 shots in a game. Like, you love that. And with the massive hole that Walker Kessler left behind him, Bruce Pearl found a way to fill it. And so you look at it now and it's like Auburn's roster is pretty close to being filled. We're going to talk about this a ton on tomorrow's show with Charlie 5. But, obviously heads turn to what happens with Julian Phillips. Does Auburn feel like they have enough as far as, a threat from behind the arc offensively? I think these are all questions that Auburn will have to answer over the next week or so, but be mentally ready that I think this roster is about finished. I think that's a good thing. I think with the guards coming back and with the 3, Chance Westry is not being discussed enough. I think he's fantastic. I think he's going to be a really big part of this team offensively. So there's just a lot of dudes on this roster that I think folks should be excited about instead of focusing on folks that maybe had a bad 2021 season. But this is going to be a good squad, and it's about done. And Janai Broome makes it a ton better. Of course, Janai Broome, the big man from Morehead State. Also, shout out to the Auburn baseball team. Before we jump into this conversation with Tyler Rowland about Roger McCreary with the Titans, they won on Saturday. Of course, they lost on Friday. I mean, it turned into a home run derby with the Tennessee Vols. And then Sunday, they just they fought tooth and nail. That was a close one, and props to those guys as they fought hard. All right, before we jump into our conversation with Tyler Rowland, I want to tell you about betonline.net. They're the number one source for all of your betting stats and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. Check it all out at BetOnline, where the game starts. And joining us now, Locked On Titans host Tyler Rowland. Tyler, look, so I'm sure you have these guys that the Titans pick up in day 3 of a particular draft, and you're like, you just kind of become fond of them. It's like, all right, I think this guy's going to crack the roster, be a potential Pro Bowler one day. That was Roger McCreary for me, a former 3-star guy. As soon as he stepped foot on campus, like, this guy is going to be something special. And my listeners are annoyed by how much I talk about and how much I love Roger McCreary. He's a Tennessee Titan now. I would love to know your initial thoughts when you saw, okay, the Titans are using their second-round pick on Roger McCreary.
Well, I got to tell you, and as you know, I instantly texted you. I was a little confused, no lie.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew McCreary was a good player who's probably going to get taken in that second tier of cornerbacks, but the Titans just drafted Caleb Farley in the first round last year. They also drafted Elijah Molden, who had a big role on the defense as a rookie last year. They drafted Christian Fulton in round 2 the year before that. So I was like, the Titans are going cornerback instead of wide receiver, offensive line, quarterback, all the other things that they need. So I was instantly shocked. But as I talked to you, I dove into more of who McCreary is as a player. I thought more about how the Titans could use him schematically and how he could make perfect sense within the defense. It kind of became clear how good of a pick it was at 35. And John Robinson noted it in his press conference after the draft. The cornerback run went pretty hot and heavy after the Titans picked McCreary. So if they didn't pick him, they probably weren't going to be able to get a cornerback of his level. So you got to like the pick. You like the value. And I think after thinking about it, he could fit very well within the Titans defense.
So what do you think that looks like? Is he an inside corner? Didn't play a whole lot of inside at Auburn. Did play inside when asked to at Senior Bowl practices. Do you think that's what he's going to be asked to do? Will they try him at outside corner? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think in a situation where you have Caleb Farley on the outside and you have Christian Fulton on the outside on the Titans defense, and I think in a situation where Caleb Farley's rehab from a torn ACL doesn't go as planned, or Caleb Farley did struggle even when he saw the field last year when he was healthy. If he just doesn't go as planned in general, then McCreary probably has the ability to go out and play some outside corner. But I think in his rookie season, where he could truly have a defined role. So what the Titans like to do is they play Elijah Molden from Washington, drafted last year, as their slot cornerback. In the NFL, it's mostly sub-package. There's not a lot of base being played. It's sub-packages with 4 down linemen, 2 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs. So when the Titans have to go to sub-packages and nickel on early downs, they bring Elijah Molden in as the slot corner so that he can defend the run, fill the run, blitz off the slot, play some zone coverage, what he does well. Well, on third downs, they would take Elijah Molden out of the slot and off the field, and they would bring in veteran Buster Screen because he was more adept as a man cover corner in the slot, and then they would leave their 2 outside guys. Well, I think that McCreary has the chance to be that third down passing slot for the Titans, where he could play one-on-one man coverage in the slot, on passing downs, on third downs, and kind of take that role over for Molden as the kind of tag team on the slot for the Titans. So that's how I profile him into the Titans defense. I think he could carve out a role in year 1. And then, as things go with Farley and the 2 outside corners, he could potentially have a role outside if needed. I think he has the potential to do that, but early on, I see him in the slot on passing downs and passing situations for the Titans.
Do they typically do some bump and run, play the slot guys closer to the line of scrimmage? That's where Roger was his best. I mean, obviously he can learn and adjust, but how do they typically use those kind of defensive backs?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the Titans do a mix of things. Of course, they're a versatile defense, a varied defense. They run cover 6, they run cover 4, they run man, they run zone. They vary it all up. But also, when the chips are on the table, the Titans play man coverage. That's what and he even said that in his press conference after the draft, talking about Roger McCreary. He was saying, we want to mix it up. We want to play zone, blah, 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 but we want to be able to play man. And we think this guy can come in right away, be in the slot, press cover. One thing I love about McCreary is his transitions. His press man transitions when he's obviously in a backpedal situation at first. He's pressing, backpedaling, and then as he flips his hips to run with the receiver, man, he is smooth and fluid in doing that. So although he doesn't have the longest arms, the physical nature, the strong hands, the ability to get up in somebody's chest and then to turn and run with them out of that all makes him a great option as a slot corner who can press, and the Titans ask their slot corners to press a ton.
Talk about, how the Titans fan base reacted to the news that Roger McCreary would be a second-round pick for you guys.
Well, I love that. That is so classic journalism. Talk about why, just classic stuff there, professional. I think that the fan base was, like me, a little confused. Didn't really see a need at cornerback. You thought maybe they would add some depth there at some point in the draft, but to use a pick that early on cornerback when it seemed, again, this all comes back to Elijah Molden. Elijah Molden was awesome for the Titans as a rookie. He was just great in his role. And by the end of the year, he's one of the best players on the defense. So everybody loves Elijah Molden. They like what he's doing and thinking he's going to increase his role this year. So to come in and say, hey, Titans might have made this pick to take Molden off the field on third downs. Well, a lot of people like me reacted to that like, wait a minute. Why would we
why would you take him off the field? Right.
Molden off? But think about the way that Molden was used and think about Molden's skill set. And again, like I said, they take him off the field on pure passing situations because he doesn't have the press man coverage skill set. And I think that there's a chance that Elijah Molden, who has some safety abilities, could be slowly converted to, because the Titans have Amani Hooker, who played at Iowa. He's their starting safety along with the first team All-Pro Kevin Byard. Well, Amani Hooker's going to be a free agent after the year, and it's no secret that the Titans cap situation is a little murky. So if they have to let Amani Hooker go, because he could get a big deal, he's a very good safety and a very underrated player. If they have to let him go, Elijah Molden, who has some safety skills, could potentially be phased into a safety role, which would then open up that slot every down role for McCreary by year 2. So when you look at it, not just for this year in this role, but you look at it for next year, and I kind of intimated that sentiment to the fan base. And I don't want to sit and talk like I speak to every Titans fan, and every Titans fan in existence listens to what I say, but
speak to a lot of them though.
Yeah, it is the number 1 ranked Titans podcast in the world. Proudly say, let's go, Locked On Empire. But right. I think after fans kind of got a whiff of what McCreary's role was and what his skill set was and how that could make sense in the Titans defense and what kind of role he could play, I think fans were like, yeah, this is a good pick, good selection.
Yeah. I think the world of Roger, I think you're going to really like covering him. I'm fascinated to see how they use him. I think he's an outside guy, but the arm thing may limit him. I mean, I think some staffs are going to look at that. And I mean, I heard some staff say that they just took him off their boards altogether with his arms being 2 inches too short and mobile.
Yeah. Some teams have length requirements.
Right. Yeah. And if that's what you need, if that's what you're looking for to build your team, then Roger's not it. But
sure.
Yeah, I mean, just, what he did in the SEC, I thought was really, really impressive. And so a lot of Auburn fans became Titans fans over the course of the weekend because he was our only guy that got drafted. So everybody's all fired up about Roger. So if folks want to follow Roger and follow the Titans, what's the best way for them to do that?
Obviously, the Locked On Titans podcast, 5 days a week, breaking it down. Locked On Titans YouTube channel. Subscribe over there. My crazy musings are on Twitter at Tic Tac Titans.
Tyler Rowland, that was fantastic. Yeah, he and I communicate a lot with just kind of behind the scenes Locked On stuff. So it was cool to actually do a show with him. That was fun. So yeah, be sure to check out Tyler Rowland. If you enjoyed his comments, let him know on socials. I think that would go a long way. Would really, really appreciate it. Tomorrow, it will be a Charlie Tuesday. This Auburn message board legend, Charlie 5, joins us to talk about Janai Broome, the Auburn basketball roster, and I got a feeling he'll want to talk about Auburn's messaging situation as well. So all that and more on tomorrow's Locked On Auburn. See ya.